Welcome to Difficult Women. I'm Courtney, Silicon Valley escapee, certified difficult woman, and someone who won't shut up about power, politics, and gender. This show is for every woman who's ever been told she's too much and kept going. Today, I'm joined by Mel Morris, empowerment coach, spiritual hype woman, and founder of This Is What's Next. She helps women and queer folks get unstuck, find clarity, and take their lives back. Today, we're digging into a big one: why so many women founders freeze up around branding, and how it's not really about marketing skills. It's about unlearning the conditioning in the patriarchy that taught us our voice was too much. Welcome, Mel. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here with you today. I mean, I'm always excited to talk to you, but this podcast, in my mind, I told you I have this clear, beautiful vision of what this podcast can be. And I'm so excited that I get to be the first and
Yay!
just to put these conversations out into the world, because there are not enough amazing women talking about shit that we really need to talk about. So,
Agreed.
yeah.
And I gotta say, there's something so empowering about having these conversations with other women who have been through it, right? Who have done the work and who've been on the other side of it. And you can just have a lot more honest conversations that way. We talked about this in the fact that we met at a conference. We connected in this environment that's very overwhelming, but
Yeah.
there was a draw between the two of us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, I'm pretty good about that. I've learned to lean into that energy, but so many women, especially when you're on a work trip, you're so focused on like, okay, I've got to get to these conference, these specific workshops, and I have to be professional and I can't show out too much because, what are the men going to think? What's my boss going to think? And so it was so nice, you and your organization, but really you, like your sparkle was on everything. The event that you hosted was such a nice opportunity to just feel like safe to let your hair down. Back when I used to have hair, and just relax and meet people. And you were just so easy, easy breezy to talk to and introduce me around to people. And so we have to be better about that, about networking in a way that is really beneficial for us as individuals first versus networking for your job.
100%. And one of the things I've worked so hard on, and this is like a perfect bridge into the topic today, is working really hard on being able to actually show up authentically. And I think a lot of women, especially women in underrepresented groups, women of color, like we get this advice that's like, show up authentically. Like male leaders get that advice too, right? Like show up and be yourself and don't question yourself, right? But with women, with a lot of underrepresented groups, you need the context. You have to read the room. You can't show up fully as yourself in a lot of spaces or you will be punished, right? Like this is the data that I was sharing with you that almost 80% of women in performance reviews get told that they're emotional. That's feedback they get in their performance reviews, which is tied to comp. Only 11% of men get that feedback. That's insane to me. That difference, that gender disparity of what we're told and coached and socialized about is that when you express yourself, you're overly emotional. And that feeds into a block around how do we brand ourselves and talk about ourselves.
And I mean, let's talk about that system for a second, right? The fact that being labeled as emotional is seen as problematic,
Right.
right? So, because I am emotional, I am the most emotional person, but that is one of my superpowers, right? And so, for me to be emotional and be able to connect to people and get deep with people and be able to help people in that way from a very emotional perspective is absolutely what's necessary. So, in a corporate environment, you have that same need, right? Employees, people that you're working with, depending on the business, need to have people who are emotional and not just, robots to really
Right.
make impact. So that's problem number one of 500 that we'll probably touch on today is that, these ideas of how we are grading people
Mhm.
is problematic.
Well, that and we never coached people on how to do it, right? Like that's a whole other conversation around we never actually taught people how to lead. We never gave people the skills to manage other people who process things differently than them. Right? So that's even another episode probably around corporate leadership gaps
Right.
and all of that. But it's so interesting to me, one of the things you touched on about being emotional, being your superpower, because I think that too. And when it comes, because if you think about it and you look at our administration in the US right now, they're operating on nothing but emotion. They're operating on nothing but ego and emotion. And somehow we don't call that emotional because they're so triggered by their egos, by whatever, right? But when women express something, even when it's in an intelligent way, if there's visual rage or if there's something that makes you uncomfortable, we just call it emotional and we put you in that emotional box. And so I've just been thinking so much about women's founders that I know. And because I work in sales and marketing, like I'm so comfortable telling brand stories. And I think for a lot of female founders, it's this combination of not having that experience in sales and marketing and being conditioned that it's not safe for other people to be uncomfortable. And that's what I keep coming back to is that like to to be successful at personal branding, you have to be very comfortable being not liked, making other people uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's the challenge. For it, you and I have spoken about this. For me, my business, it's service based. And so when I think about sales and selling my business, I'm selling me, right?
100%.
And so, for someone who is focused on helping people, providing service from people, and especially from a very emotional perspective, right? There's not many times that I'm with clients that there are not tears involved. And again,
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. But it's difficult to sell yourself, to sit around and talk about how great I am, how amazing I am. I mean, I know I am amazing. I am great. I know the impact that I have on people, but it's never been, I don't want to use the word safe. I mean, maybe it is, but it's never been, it's always frowned upon
Mm,
for women, especially, to talk about themselves in a big, bold, beautiful way. We're supposed to be more demure, more subdued, more thinking about the community and less about ourselves. And so, part of that certainly is conditioning, right? That I recognize I have to work on. But that, again, that goes back to that difference between how men and women are raised, how our culture, and I say our because it's all of us, right? We were
totally.
all been brainwashed into the same system. And anybody, especially in this country, boys are supposed to be loud and make noise and break things, and women are supposed to be the ones to fix it. So we
Yes.
don't so we don't get to be the ones who complain, and we don't get to be the ones to stand up and say, "Hey, what about me?" Because that's supposed to be the men. And so,
Totally.
you know, I definitely have for years been in the process of unlearning that notion of it's okay, it's not icky, it's not salesy, car salesy to talk about how great you are and how amazing the work is that you do. You have to do it. But that is definitely a stumbling block for me as long as I've had my business.
But it's not just you. It's almost
Right.
every female founder that I have talked to. And
Mhm.
it's interesting because it comes from so many different places and everybody's story is different and everybody carries different life experiences and all of that. But to your point, it's we've been coached all of us, right? Like when we talk about the patriarchy, we have internalized misogyny as women. The patriarchy is hurting men just as much as it's hurting women, right? Like this is not just a men versus women. This is a systemic issue. But the system teaches women that we have to be humble, right? And demure and, you know, thank you. But yes, like to your point, it was a team effort.
Right.
Thank you, but I don't want to take credit. I want to take credit. That was me. I'm brilliant.
Yeah.
So that is the part that I think it's, as women, it's this extra layer of I'm going to be villainized in some ways for just living who I am, regardless of what shape that takes. If I'm not centering other people's comfort first, then I'm going to piss people off. And I think for a lot of women, that's the hardest hurdle.
Yeah. And I'll say, in my experience, that unfortunately, most of that comes from other women. If I
Yes.
am talking about myself, how great I am, what I'm doing, 9 times out of 10, it is the other women in that space. If someone has a problem, it's the women who will be like, oh, like, get over yourself. But then stand there and applaud when some mediocre man is talking about the fact that he, tied his shoes in one try.
Yep. Yep.
Gosh, good job. So it's that process of unlearning that we all have to go through. But you have to be willing to, right? You have to recognize it. And I think a lot of women that I work with don't, there's so many of those blind spots that they don't even recognize. And they'll have those types of reactions. And until somebody calls them on it, they don't even notice it because it's just so ingrained in who they are.
Well, and it's not even necessarily a personal failing, and I think that we oftentimes take it that way. It's just recognizing that we're all being conditioned and that we
Right.
all have like unlearning to do, because we're talking a lot about the gender element here, but there's a race element that comes into play, right? Like
Yep.
we live in the US where white supremacy is the other system layered on top of the patriarchy.
Right.
So it's not like you and I are dealing with different buckets of challenges with other overlap, right? Because there's also the totally unfair stereotype. I know a lot of powerful, wildly intelligent Black female founders who are very aware of how they're perceived around their anger, right? Or expressing their rage.
Right.
And that's so
I
unfair.
mean,
It's
that's
another layer.
right. And that kind of goes back to that emotional piece. It's a extra dig on that emotional piece, right? So if I disagree and I am assertive, not aggressive, assertive about telling you why I disagree and here's my opinion, then yes, it's you're being emotional and that was really aggressive. Because
That.
I okay. Yeah,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
absolutely.
So
And
it's
which
interesting.
frankly, I'm okay with it. Like I've gotten to the point in my life, I can't not be me, right? And
Right.
and I have something to say about just about everything. But I also don't need to be right. I want to know what's happening and I want to be a part of if there's a problem, how we're fixing it. So I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to question the system and the status quo. And I don't personally, I don't care. I really don't care if people don't like it. I've told you before, I can't think of a time where someone's actually challenged me on it and said, like, what do you, that was really inappropriate for you to speak up. And, that's not true. Actually, I can think of one time, but he was just an asshole about everything. But
We all have those, right?
but on the whole, I mean, people haven't necessarily pushed back, and I don't know why. I don't know if that aggression seems so severe, people are nervous to say anything. But it's so important, and it's so easy though to stay silent because as a woman, what's going to happen. As a Black woman, what's going to happen. You know how hard you had to work to even get a seat at the table to hear what's happening, let alone speak about it. So there is
Right.
such a tightrope that we have to walk and decide every day, every moment of every day, which way are we going to lean because this might be the thing that's too far. You know,
And isn't
how do
that
we do that
exhausting?
without being silent? Yeah, oh, fucking exhausting. Yeah.
Like, Jesus Christ, right? And it's like, I think about that in our corporate roles too. Like, I had so the pattern of me triggering male bosses in corporate is just like, I mean, I could write that storybook. I could tell it with my eyes closed, right? And it's like it just happens over and over again. And it's like you get to a point, if you've done the work, especially as a woman who has a woman of color, a woman with disabilities, whatever it may be, right? Like you've done that work because you had to. Nobody else was coming to save you, right? Like you had to figure out how to show up for yourself. You had to figure out how to regulate your own nervous system. You had to figure out how to do the emotional work to be able to show up for yourself when nobody else could see you, because we've had that experience of nobody else fucking seeing us. And so for a lot of men in leadership, they've never experienced not being seen. They've never
Oh,
experienced, they don't know what that is. So they've not had to do that work. And so I find that men don't struggle with the branding in the same way because they don't get the same messaging. They just go out and assume they're brilliant and talk themselves up for tying their fucking shoes. But outside of founders and branding your own business, it's in the corporate structure too, where women are just stuck. You can't fully express yourself in that structure because you're going to trigger the men at the top. And we look at this at the macro level in the US right now, and it's exactly what's playing out.
this idea of how we are supposed to show up, not just in what we say, but in how we look, right? So we also have to be beautiful, whatever that means, right? Always look sexy, but not too sexy where you look like you're selling something, but sexy enough where men want to look at you and listen to you, because obviously if you're not attractive, men can't hear you. So there's that balance of not just what I say before I say anything. When I walk into the room, if I'm not showing up as this superstar that whoever has in their mind, I'm already at a disadvantage as well. So even, getting dressed, like what am I wearing to this meeting or to this event? How am I going to be perceived based on first impressions, based on this ridiculous standard of beauty, is something too that is exhausting, that we even have to think about that before we get to whoever we're going to talk to. I have to hold
Right.
your attention visually, the men, for you to even hear what I have to say, for you to even say that I'm being too aggressive.
And to your point, it's not just the men, right? It's the women that will judge too, because it is about being palatable. It is, we as women are expected to always be palatable. Always. I don't want to be palatable. I
I'm
don't
not.
want to be palatable. I am not palatable for everybody. That word's going to lose all meaning soon. But like, do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not for everybody, and that's okay. I want to be for me first.
Right.
And that's the hardest work. And then once I know how to show up for myself, don't fucking tell me that I can't share that story, because that's powerful.
And I think the irony is that for, let's say, hiring managers, like you brought me here, right? You took the time to look at what I did in the past, ask me some questions. You liked what you saw. You put me on the payroll, but now you judge everything that I do or say or act. So if there's a problem, whose fault is that?
Right.
you know? Because I'm sure for you, you never showed up a place in like regular glasses and no jewelry and very low key. So, okay, you knew I was extra when I walked through the door the first time,
Listen,
and
I
you made a
purposely
choice.
showed up. Yes. And I honestly believe, because I have gone out of my way, to your point, to be like, I am not misrepresenting. I am not like, this is not false advertising. I showed up specifically to one of my interviews with pink highlights and a leopard blazer, right? Like, hey,
Because of
just be
course.
aware. Be aware. And I still think what happens, this is upon reflection and lots of therapy. I still think what happens is these men, because it was always men doing the evaluating and the hiring,
Okay.
would look at me and see, there's so much potential of the good stuff in her that I think I can extract more out of. And I, as a man who is the master of the universe and is so smart and can control things, I can manage the stuff that is like a little rough around the edges. I'll coach that out. I'll manage that. And that I think is what happens. There's an ego every single time that they're like, yes, I see how she can benefit me and I'll fix the rest of her.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Because I will tell you that for the last, I mean, I haven't worked for someone else in 10 years now, but prior to that, the 20 years probably before that, I not only always showed up as me and was always very vocal about who I was and what I had to offer for sure, but I joke all the time about how many times I tried to talk myself out of a job, like to other people. Like I'm giving you my list of shit that I'm not gonna do.
Uh-huh.
Number one being like I'm not a morning person, so if you need me sitting in the seat at 9 o'clock, that's probably not gonna happen.
Mm-hmm.
But if you need me here at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night to get shit done, absolutely. That's going to happen whether you ask for it or not. So I spend a lot of time giving you all the things that traditional people seem to be so tied to. And again, to my point, if you have a problem at that point, it's you.
It's you. Because you've done the work. You're like, listen, I gave you my operating guide. Like, I gave you my instruction manual. It's not my fault that you decided to throw that out.
And, and it's our job. And I think a lot of people don't like to hear this, but it's our job to also manage when people don't see that, when people want to push back about who you are intrinsically. It is our job to correct that. Right. And so
Yes.
many times, and I've done it in the past, certainly I've let it slide. I've not said something and then been pissed about it. But then I had to say to myself, like, well, who are you pissed at? Why didn't you say something? Right. And I
Mm-hmm.
get, again, it's a power dynamic that we all have to figure out, is it worth losing my job over or not? So I understand that at certain times I was in a place of privilege where if somebody didn't like it and got fired, I wouldn't starve. Right. But
Right.
so many times when people would challenge, I started working at this private college outside of Philadelphia. They were creating this Department of Diversity.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't a lot of diverse kids on the campus or staff or faculty. And they knew they needed to create this, but they had no clue of what they were doing. And that was one of those jobs where I really try to talk them out of the job. But they knew coming in, I said, listen, I know this is a new department. I know that your campus is not accustomed to dealing with, it was a Catholic. Did I mention Catholic? Catholic private. Right. I said, I am not Catholic, by the way. And so I said, I recognize that this is a new department and that you're kind of meeting this standard that you have to. And if you want someone to come in and just like hang the diversity shingle up and be here for show, I get that. I get the comfort in that. That's not what I'm going to do. So I need for you all to really consider how far you want to go with this, because this is what I do. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to be having these conversations. I'm going to be meeting with Father so and so before Mass and talking about the LGBT kids and what they need. So, again, I get it if you're not there, but this is what I'm going to do. I am a Black, gay woman.
Yep.
Oh, no, that's it. Da, 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 da. I wasn't there 2 weeks when there was a dinner for the president. The president had dinner for all the like high level department directors and executive folks. My boss at the time, who was one of the vice presidents, called me in and said, a few people have mentioned that you have pictures of your partner. We weren't married at the time, of your partner in your office. Yeah. And it's just weird to me, like several people have mentioned that you have a partner. You know I had a partner, right? Oh no, no, absolutely. What I just wanted to say was that if you're, I hope that you bring her to the president's dinner, but maybe you couldn't introduce her as your partner. And I said, so what should I introduce her as? I mean, I'm not telling you what to, no, you are. How are you going to introduce your husband? Are we just calling him Bob?
Your
Whatever.
roommate?
No, I said you brought me here because this campus needed to have conversations around these issues of diversity and equity. So, though I probably wasn't going to make a big deal about calling her my partner, people would just kind of get it because everybody there knows I have a partner. Now I'm going to make a point of introducing her as my partner because we need to have the conversations, right? I'm really glad you brought this up.
Oh my God.
But it would have been easy for me as this new employee in this new department, figuring all this shit out, to just be like, okay, and let it slide.
Yeah.
But why? Right?
Why?
Like,
Because then it breeds resentment for me, it would, right? Like then that's like a
but
little chink of resentment.
right. And to your point though, it brings it back to, this notion of how we're representing ourselves all the time and really what we're allowing from other people from the beginning. From the beginning, the way that we're selling ourselves, the way that we're branding ourselves. I had to show up from the beginning as I'm not going to bow down.
Uh-uh.
I'm going to push back. And I mean, every time we had a situation that was uncomfortable, okay, let's talk about it. I'm not afraid about it. Let's talk about it.
You just connected something for me in how you explained that, because one of the things that I'm noticing in these conversations and thinking about branding and just sales and marketing in general in this moment, in this uncertain economy and all of the things that are happening, I work with a lot of women who are executives in like the HR and people space. And right now, they care so deeply about the work that they're doing, right? Like they really believe in this work and they got into that work for a reason. And it's a lot of women and it's a lot of people of color, right? And it's a lot of underrepresented groups. And they believe in this work so deeply. In this moment where so many companies are completely capitulating, where the leadership has gone silent, where they're scared, they're running scared, and they're not standing in their values and they're not fighting back. It's like we're seeing how transactional most of the leadership really is and how they don't actually believe in their values. That the minute the winds change, they flip, they're transactional, they will tuck tail and try to protect themselves. That's what we're seeing. And I'm seeing so many women at that leadership level below starting to come apart at the seams because they're just like, can I do my job? Like what I'm being asked to do, like my charter of my role is at odds with this kind of late stage capitalist system that's falling apart. And it is creating this like moral injury for these women where it ties into how I think about the branding of like we get stuck in these companies that promise things that they don't mean because they're completely transactional. And then we associate that with branding. And so then when we try to do it for ourselves, it's like, this feels icky. And I know I'm lying. It doesn't feel really aligned with the world. And now I'm just selling something. And that's gross because I lived it and it was gross.
Right.
But like we as female founders operate differently, especially I as a neurodiverse female founder, you as a Black queer female founder with different we think differently, right? Like, and we bring different experiences to the table. So when it comes to figuring out how to brand ourselves, I think it's like we have to take two steps back to be like, well, what does aligned, honest branding actually mean for me? And what values am I comfortable standing in when things get hard?
I mean, for me, there aren't role models in the system, right?
Mhm.
That really align to me and to what I do. So anything, I've spent way too much money on people's programs and schools and all the things that all of these people are selling, mostly all white people, mostly white women, in fairness. And obviously, I'm not anti-white women, right? My mom was a white woman, but
But it's different. It's different.
but but it's different, and at some point going through any of those programs you see behind the curtain, right? You see that though you got sucked in, to your point, you got sucked in by this initial like, these are my values and this is what I care about and this is what I do. At some point down halfway through you're like, wait a minute, how come we've never had a conversation about how this ties into that, right? How is it that me as a woman or as a black woman, or it doesn't have to be specifically targeted to black gay women, right? Because that's a very narrow niche, but none of that is translating into the actual work that you're producing and that you're selling, that you have sold to me. And so every single time I have gotten to a point where it's like, this is not who you said you were. And this is not what I need. And again, what do you do with that? Right. I mean, it's not about the money. Yeah, I was pissed that I gave you all this money and realized I got fun flammed. But ultimately, it's wow, you have such a huge audience that is buying into what you're selling. And you are
Mhm.
continuing to perpetuate the problem where you are
Right.
not helping women, especially, even though that's who you're targeting, you are not helping women figure out who they are, how they're going to show up authentically, right? There's this generic authentically, like show up and be proud and,
Which
be
is
great.
dangerous. As a white woman, if you're peddling that, as a privileged, pretty white woman, if you're peddling the show up authentically speech to disabled women, women of color, neurodivergent, you are setting them up to get fucked. Like, that's not fair and that's not right. And if you're setting me off. I'm like, if you are a white woman selling shit and you're not talking about intersectionality and you're not talking about women of color and you're not talking about disabled women and you're not talking about neurodivergent women and you're not talking about queer women and you're not talking about trans women, then I don't care what you have to say.
Yeah. And the representation, it's troubling that so many, you look at these like online conferences, right? You see the list of all these prominent speakers. If I look at that group and how does nobody notice that you have these 20 speakers who all are the most vanilla looking people possible? Why on earth would I believe that you know how to help me? How is it that this is still okay? Like, it's 2025 and I'm still seeing these kinds of panels with nothing but white people on them. I don't care what you're talking about. That's not the point. The point is that there's no diverse perspective here. If you
Zero.
can't even be bothered to take a step back and say, how have I not thought of any black or brown people? Then that's a problem,
And it's even
and
more than that. It's the same bucket of white people. It's not just that they're not zooming out to include a more diverse audience. It's that they're that group. It's that palatable, comfortable group, right? Of like certain socioeconomic status, certain titles, certain roles, it's a certain presentation that we're comfortable with. And we go back to that well over and over and over again because it's palatable. And so we're like, well, we did it and it's palatable. But the only way change actually happens is when things aren't palatable, is when people actually get uncomfortable. Like, that's what branding actually is, right? Like, this was the thing as a late diagnosed neurodivergent woman with ADHD, right? Like, trying to figure shit out and being told I'm flaky and don't know how to, like, just being told all these terrible things about myself, that I'm lazy and, undisciplined and all of this stuff. And so once I figured out that I had ADHD, then I was like, oh, I can fix it because I can learn how to do things for neurodiverse people and get all these tips from other neurodiverse people. And then when those tips didn't work, I felt even worse. Like,
yeah.
oh, you're extra broken because now you know what's wrong with you and you still can't do the thing. And it
Mhm.
was really for me, and this is actually what I think branding is about, like personal nervous system work, because like I had to do the work to get to that point of like, what feels good for me? How am I managing this for myself? And being able to be comfortable that this is just an expression of me, my values, and what I really believe.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'll stand in that even if people are screaming at me from all sides, because like I've been able to like center in that for myself. And I think for a lot of women, they just don't have the chance because we're busy and we're not safe. We don't have those environments to like get to that point a lot of times.
Yeah, agreed. So what's, in the work that you do, what are some of the solutions that you offer to those of us who struggle with those issues? Even the ones who are working through our shit. What are those good suggestions that you have?
Yeah, and I think that, the branding work, I think about this across a lot of different things. So there's like the work before the work. And so when you're thinking about like what is your personal brand, right? You start to think about what am I adding? How do I want to tell the story? But I think there's a step that has to happen before that, right? Which is like the work before the work. So before you think about how am I presenting my personal brand, I think it's an internal reflection of like, what's my goal for, like, what's going to make me feel good? Like, what's my goal for the brand? How do I want to connect with other people? How do I want to feel in these situations? And I take a lot of that kind of taking a minute to be able to check in with yourself. I've done like a lot of nervous system work. So I pull some of that in because I think the most important thing is figuring out how to get grounded and aligned with what works for you, regardless of what everybody else says. So, like, all that neurodivergent work advice that I got didn't work for me. But when I was able to finally start listening to my own body and like tap into myself more, I found the stuff that worked for me. And it became way more powerful because it felt good for me. And I think in this world of social media and in this world where we're all commodities online, like we all get fed the same stuff. And so we're all kind of like just doing other people's versions of things. And we
Right.
aren't doing our own critical thinking to be like, does this feel good for me? Does this align in my body? And so when I think about personal branding, before you get into the like, well, what's your language and how are you? It's before you even do that, it's, hey, can you even hear yourself? Because that's first. And you got to have that conversation first. Then we can map out what the bigger external brand looks like because it has to align. Otherwise, it's transactional and it will blow with the wind.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And um I don't do sales and marketing and branding, but that's exactly what I help people with. When again, I've been a coach, I've been a trainer, I've been in the training world for over 30 years. And I love it. But early on, so much of it was focused on teams and groups and group dynamic. And at some point, I just realized like, that's great, like surface level. If there's a problem, I'm contracting with somebody and their office is just not vibing. But the important work, the lasting, meaningful work has to be self, right? And so
Yes.
I didn't want to create another one of these coaching programs where, you know, we're talking about how to show up in your teams and no, I don't care about that. And again, will tell people like, that's not what I'm doing. I'm
Uh
not
huh.
going to teach you how to be a seven-figure first launch boss bitch. That's not what I'm going to teach you. I am so much about like, who are you?
Yes.
How do you know that? Are you even listening? I mean, it's so funny that the Substack I just wrote that'll be out this week is about listening, right? And so, because you have to start there, because like you said, we're in this bubble of everybody trying to one up the same thing that somebody else is already doing. Where is the originality? Where is that authenticity? That's what the authenticity is. I shut up for a minute and listened to myself, and myself said, this is what makes sense. Try this thing, right? And again, we aren't taught that. We're not taught to listen to ourselves. We're taught to listen to your parents and listen to your teachers and listen to your professors and then listen to your boss. But at no point is there a class on understanding who the F you are.
Right.
Where's that class?
Right.
Right? Like
Listen, I didn't
they
really learn
class
how to feel
and
my
class on
feelings
class.
until I was in my 30s. Like, I needed a therapist to actually teach me how to feel my feelings. Like, we didn't learn this shit.
Right. Right.
And I think that that is so. Go ahead.
No, I just that is so key to, and I'm glad that you said that about, the from a branding marketing perspective, because that part I got. Like I have honed that skill because that's the skill
Yeah.
that I try to help other people with. And so it's refreshing to hear that that's the ideal
You've
starting
done
point.
step 1. Like, you have the foundation, right? So now I can come in, and since you've already done that work of that foundation, then it becomes a lot easier to build an aligned personal brand on top of that foundation, because then it's locked in when the wind blows, when people come at you, when somebody's doesn't get it, right? But for so many people, they haven't had a Mel to coach them to do the foundational work, right? And if you don't have that foundational work, whatever branding you're trying to build, you're building it on air. And so when external factors come into play, it's the experience you had with those other coaches, right? Like, they were building what they thought you wanted to hear. They were building for that they were built on air, right? There was no real foundation that was built on, or that wouldn't have been the experience you had, right? So it's like the work you're doing and supporting people in, whether they realize it or not, is a really critical first step to actually being able to build a powerful personal brand, period.
Because you don't want to end up like Target.
Talk about a disconnect. Talk about not reading the situation.
And I mean, I will say of all, there's a lot of, I'm not easily surprised at the ridiculous things that happen in this world, but I am surprised about Target. Like, they have been all in for years in the Black community, in the LGBTQ plus community, and to just shift gears so instantaneously. I was really surprised, and I am so proud of people really banding together and saying, "Absolutely not. No, ma'am. You will not get our funds anymore."
No,
I love it.
action works and community works. And it's like, you don't get to exploit a group, you don't get to exploit a community for profit and then throw them away the minute the wind blows the other way, because we saw cracks in that armor over the last few years, right? When they were pulling some of their LGBT stuff, we saw cracks in it. And
Yeah.
so I wasn't fully surprised, but I was fully disappointed
Oh,
and thrilled at the backlash, because F around and find out, baby.
yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
on that note, I think this was a fabulous branding conversation. Don't be Target, be aligned. Thank you so much, Mel, for joining me for this very first episode of Difficult Women Will Save the World. I think this is a fabulous foundation for us all to think about.
Agreed. I'm very excited to have been here. I always have a great time with you. I am wishing you all of the continued success with this podcast. I can just see it being absolutely amazing. So thank you for putting it together.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Mel. Have a fabulous day.